Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to invite you on my journey to turn this into this. Okay, so the original plan was to put in a live edge slab as the countertop. I thought it would be a great sort of addition to the woodsy look that we're going for. But checking Craigslist and the free ads, as I often do, found this a whole pile of rough sawn lumber for free. And so plans changed. None of it was, I mean, there's some 2-inch thick stuff that you'd want for a slab countertop, but not really enough to really make the whole counter width. So I figured to do a butcher block instead. Now a lot of butcher blocks are maple because the grain is so tight and it's not very porous and it's pretty hard wood. I didn't get any maple there, just got some oak, which the grain's a little bit bigger, well, it's significantly bigger, but still a pretty hard wood. And it was free, so that's kind of a big reason to go with it. And I think we're going to epoxy it anyway. I've never really done any epoxy. It'd be a good opportunity to try something new, and so that will seal it up pretty good. So process. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rip it down to length. I want the countertop to be 80 inches, so I'm going to cut them to length a little bit longer than that, but a lot shorter than they are. Just makes it a lot easier to work with as we try to smooth it down. So here we go. So next step is I want to get a straight edge on one of these sides. This piece isn't so bad, but a lot of them have sort of the live edge on it, which is great, but it's not going to work for these purposes, so I need to get it off. Obviously you can't put an uneven edge against the table saw. So I'm going to build a sled. I had another one, but it's too short, so I have to make another one. So I've got some plywood that I ripped up, and here's a sheet of MDF, and this is the factory edge, so MDF is pretty straight. It's not super rugged stuff, but it'll work for this purposes. So I know that this factory edge is going to be super straight, so I can screw these on, put these toggle clamps on. This will hold the lumber on the sled, and I'll run this edge against the fence, and this edge I'll cut, and that will, I know this edge over here will be straight. So let's screw these on. Alright, so now I kind of put the edge that's a little bit straighter. Definitely got sort of a bow in this edge out here. Not that it's critical, but try to put the straighter edge up against the fence, clamp it down, and run it through the saw. Now that I've got one straight edge, I want to rip them down smaller so that I can plane them. If you get if there's a big cup in it, when you try to plane wide boards, you end up taking a lot off the sides, for example, or if the other way, a lot off the top before we finally get to some even thickness. But if you cut them smaller, there's less variances in between, and so you can get them at least flat. Because I'm going to go width-wise. I don't know, I'm not explaining this very well. So because our butcher block is going to be, instead of normal wood, it's kind of flat like this, we're going to use a side grain and go like this. And since it doesn't really matter, this one can be thicker than this one, you're just going to cover ground going across. All I want to do is make sure I get them flat. So I want my countertop to be 2 inches thick, and so I'm going to rip these down eventually to 2 1/4, and now I get a little bit of extra room. That way I can run it through a planer and get it nice and smooth before I put the final, before it gets all finalized. And so the other thing though is running not thousands, but a whole bunch of 2.5-inch stock through the planer. It takes longer, so I think I'm going to rip them first at like 4.5, and then plane them, join them, plane them, and then do the final rip down to 2.5. I think would be a little bit more time efficient. side through my joiner. Again, it's not a great joiner. It's kind of short, so I kind of have limited confidence in it, but maybe it'll be okay. And that way we can get one side perfectly flat, and then when we run it through the planer, because then for the rollers and the planer, sometimes the boards kind of juke and jive through there. So even though you're planing off wood, they're still a little warped, and hopefully this will keep things a little bit flatter. So another thing about joiners run through things, again, they're awesome to have because you can, again, you take rough cut wood for much less money. You gotta pat your wood like a cat, and so you want to run it through so I can feel this way is smooth and this way is rough. You're kind of like going the wrong way with cat fur or dog. If you're a dog person, we don't have a cat, we just got the dog. So I know I got to run it this way so that the fibers are going like this rather than like that, and a lot of tear out. So this way it's nice and smooth. So use the table saw to get the edges fairly straight, and then the joiner to get one of the faces. And now that we're pretty sure that that bottom part is flat, now we'll put it through the planer and get that final side. All right, cool. Used to look something like this. Now it looks like this. That's good. Whew, it's a lot of moving lumber around. So now back to the table saw. We're going to rip these down to 2 1/4. Again, that's a 1/4 inch over what the final countertop thickness will be. That way I can run through the planer after the glue up in sections anyway, to get it nice and smooth and flat. All right, we got them all laid out on my clamps, and I tried to put the so-called good side down. That way I can make it as flat as I can. So any bad knots or weird splits or whatever, I tried to put up here, which ultimately will be the bottom of the countertop. And I don't know, I had a couple that were short there. I don't know how. When I cut, and I don't know what I did, but that's okay. I'm just going to put some pieces in there when I start gluing, and a lot of butcher blocks done with that anyway, so that'll be fine. Now, they're not super even right here, which is okay. And so what I'm going to do, my planer, again, I wish I would love to be able to afford a nice, 25, 26 inch planer, but they're fun. They jump from like $600 to like 15 or a couple thousand. So that's not in the card. So what I'm going to do is I'll glue it, but when I get to about 8 inches, I won't put glue in that seam, and then the same thing over here, about 8 inches. So basically divide it into thirds and glue it up. Then I can run each section through the planer and get it nice and flat, and then finally I'll glue those 3 pieces together. I might even biscuit it just to help it keep it even, and then that'll just reduce the amount of sanding I have to do. So again, kind of a more of a tedious process. We're gonna glue like the wind. And also, again, remember I've got like, an 1.5 inches on each side, so I'm not going to worry about getting the ends particularly or perfect, because at the end I'm just going to cut them off, and it'll be a whole lot faster that way. So, alrighty, here we go. I got to remember to not glue. So if I glue the whole thing together, that'd be bad. So yeah, if I get to like past here and I keep gluing, yell at me, say stop, don't glue that. That'll be helpful. Section glued up here, and the glue's dried a little bit. I like to take a chisel, one of my old chisels, and just kind of go through and scrape off some of the glue while it's still soft. Let that dry a bit more, and then we'll run them all through the planer again. Alright, so I brought the counter in, and I have oriented it the way I want, put like some of the nicer grains towards the front, and sort of labeled everything so I know which goes where. And now I'm going to use a biscuit joiner to biscuit the three pieces together, because once it's all together it won't fit through the planer anymore, and so I want to try to make it as flat as absolutely possible, so I can limit the heavy sanding of oak, which takes a long time to try to make it even. So I'm going to put one, I guess, every foot. Again, I don't want to put too many, because then it seems like there's more chance for error, but I want to put enough that it'll all lock together. And so I made my mark every foot. And one of them, I'm going to use my T-square to mark the joints where I'm going to put the biscuits. You can already see I got kind of a bow in that one that I'm going to have to clamp out of it when I do the final glue up. So now, just line up my marks with the biscuit joiner, like that. Alright, so now in theory, you put these biscuits into those grooves, and the two sides lock together, and it will hold them even. As you know though, sometimes theory and reality aren't the same thing, so let's see what it looks like. Barely got enough room on my clamps here. Oh, there's got to be a better way to do this. I'm gonna dry fit it first before I glue it to see what it looks like. The other thing that's really useful is labeling. So I marked side A, and this is side A, with B and B, so that you kind of make sure the ones line up the way you want. So since the good side's underneath, I'm just gonna have to. Oh, that feels good. That one's not so great for some reason. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Definitely gonna need a little bit of sanding in the middle for whatever reason, but not terrible. So, been about 4 hours. Here's the countertop all glued up. It's actually, can barely tell the seam. Here's one of them right here. And that's actually came out really good. I can sand that one. And I've got a little bit of a raised edge right there, which is one of the mysteries of working with wood. It seems like no matter what you do, you still got that little bit of an edge. So. Alright, we're looking pretty good here. Kind of smooth things down. Really what I did is I just kind of looked for any sort of slight tear outs from the planer and sanded those down. I'm not It's pretty smooth. There's a couple little bumps in it, but the epoxy is going to level that out anyway. So, got a couple little gaps, like right there. So what I did, neat little trick. You may know this, maybe not. Take some wood glue and some sawdust. This, I pulled the same sawdust from this project, so something from the table saw. I'm gonna rub it in that gap. Now while it's still wet, I'm gonna sand it down, and the sawdust from the sanding combines with the glue, covers up that gap. There, that gap is right there. Now, can't even see it. Cool. Alright, so we got the countertop up in the bus. I've trimmed off the edges to get to the right length, and now I gotta put my templates in and cut the inserts for the stove over here. Had to make a template because it's an old stove that didn't come with one. So, and then we got our sink down here slash swimming pool. It just seems huge, but I get the little temporary camper one in seemed kind of small. So I guess this is it. So that gives us actually pretty nice counter space here to work with, I guess. So I guess it'll be all right. So I've got to pre-drill some holes so I can get my jigsaw in. Like this, I can get straight lines I can cut with my circular saw. It's 2 inches oak thick though, so I'm gonna probably have to cut it in a couple passes. And then a little nervous about this one. Jigsaws typically aren't that powerful. I mean, I have a Bosch, pretty good saw, but even then, it's going to be some tough going, I think. So I'm trying to get a nice clean edge, and because it's going to be exposed and you can see it, it's got to be good. So I have to take it slow and be careful. So here we go, I guess. This is the part I hate this part. Alright, so as far as jigsawing goes, not a complete disaster. Jigsaws are hard, I find, especially this 2-inch stuff. So you can see I got a little bit kind of a rough edge there. I got some unevenness kind of right here. So I'm going to take this belt sander and work on evening out and smoothing out the edges. The other thing, some places the jigsaw blade goes from like straight up and down. It kind of bends out a little bit, so I want to try to be as perpendicular as I can to make that edge yeah, I can see it right kind of on this edge too. So I'm going to try to flatten this edge as much as I can. Alright, I'm thinking that's pretty good. You know, it could be a little bit better in a couple spots, but then I worry that if I start sanding too much, it's just going to make it worse. So, like this right in here is a little too deep. Can't really undo that, but I think it'll be okay. I'm going to switch to some 120 grit and smooth it down. And I think that's gonna be all right. Alright, so I've sanded everything again with a belt sander at like a 120. Now I'm going to take a router with a round over bit. I'm going to round the edges that are going to be exposed. Go down a 220 grit now. And one little trick that you may want to use when finishing wood is right before you get to that final sand, wipe it down with a damp cloth. And it does a couple different things. One, it raises the grain, and something about the moisture makes the little fibers stand up. And then when you sand them down, they kind of stay down, they stay smooth. But if you don't do that, when you put your first coat of finish on, it'll raise the grain, and then you'll have to sand it. You know, really to get that nice smooth finish, you're going to want to sand it again in between your coats, and that will kind of just keep it a little bit smoother. But the other reason I really want to do in this one, because it also lets you know if you missed any glue. Like when you wipe it down with a damp cloth, any spots there's still a little glue on that you can't really see when it's dry, well, like there'll be like a color stain, it'll look different. And then you know you have to go back and sand that spot out, because when you put the finish on, those glue spots will pop out. So, which I imagine we'll do with the epoxy, so I didn't want to do that. So I wiped it down, dried up, and actually I didn't have any glue spots, I'm good to go. So I'm going to do one coat of one sand of 220, and then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to put a coat of poly, probably like 3 coats of poly on the bottom of it, just to seal the bottom. If you just put a finish on one side, moisture will get in from one side but not the other, and it'll warp it. So that's what we'll do. If you got little bubble wrap and packing, or like this little styrofoam stuff, it's a good idea to keep it. I like putting it down so I don't ding up the sides that I've really finished. So whenever I'm sanding, a lot of times I put that underneath my good stuff. So, all right, so we're ready to start pouring our epoxy. Again, I haven't really done this before, so this would be an interesting experiment. But yeah, so precise measurement. So I've got my graduated cylinders here, kind of, and it says, all right, so I'm gonna do a skim coat or seal coat to make sure, seal everything up first, and then let that dry for 4 hours, and then put a flood coat on after that. So skim coat, the directions say about, I got about 12 square feet, actually probably a little bit less. So I'm going to go with 16 ounces of each, and they said that, again, you want to measure it exact. So I'm going to go 16 ounces of the hardener, 16 ounces of the resin. Oh, it's a lot thicker, isn't it? Perfect. The directions say it recommends pouring the hardener in first and then the resin. So we'll do that. And then you got to mix for 5 to 7 minutes. I think this is more of a 5 because I'm actually less with the skim coat. Alright, and then mix for 5 minutes. So it says at this part to scrape the sides often, and it's going to get cloudy. It's already getting cloudy. But also not to pull the stick out and whip it. So you don't want to whip it good, because then you get lots of bubbles. So just over the next couple minutes it's supposed to get clear. Alright, we mixed for 5 minutes. It is indeed fairly clear now. Looks like there's a few bubbles in there, but those are going to come out anyway. So now we're going to pour right down the middle, and then use this little squeegee to spread it out. So it's supposed to be 70 degrees. I'm at like 68 and warming, so I'm hoping that's going to be good. It's going to be tough to go down the middle. The other thing is, just make sure, actually I did a great job with my leveling. I just kind of took my level on the table both ways, that way it spreads evenly. It says not to scrape, so I'm just trying to get as much out as I can. Now I'm going to spread. It said you can use brushes to create bubbles. Gently, and any of the bubbles, So here's the skim coat. It looks pretty good. I actually haven't got a whole lot of bubbles actually. What's tricky, and it's tough to see maybe with the camera, but you get these little tiny divots where it just didn't seal up, like maybe there's a small crack in the wood. And part of me wants to go in and fix it, and part of me is worried that I'll just end up screwing it up more. So this isn't the final coat, so maybe I'll leave it as it is. And then you got these little drips underneath you're supposed to keep sort of rubbing off, and then you can actually cut them or grind them off later on. So I'm going to keep an eye on it for the next hour or so to make sure no bubbles pop up. Again, if the bubbles pop up, you just take that blowtorch and very gently heat them, and they pop right out, like the 3 or 4 I had. And then we'll come back in an hour, I believe. I have to double check. And do the flood coat. Cool. All right, it says wait 4 to 6 hours. Put the flood coat on, and it's been almost 6 because it was still pretty tacky when I checked it at 4, and it's supposed to be somewhat tacky, but I don't want it to cure as much as it could. So here we are back for the flood coat. This coat actually looks pretty good. I got some spots, like you can see that one kind of right there, where the wood soaked it up pretty much. And I got a couple other spots down, harder to tell down here because of the light on the end. But other than that, it seems to come out pretty good. So hopefully that flood coat will seal up those spots and make pretty. The mixture's clear this time, but it's a lot bubblier, which makes me nervous. But I guess we can use the blowtorch, and looks like an awful lot. Okay, so we're 24 hours out of the flood coat, and voila, here it is. Looking pretty good, I guess, for my first one. We'll talk about that. It's not perfect, but pretty good, I think, for the first one. So again, kind of nerve-wracking going through, chasing out all the bubbles. I kind of felt like a hunter with my blowtorch and stalking the bubbles. Oh, there's one. And it took about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, and there's still like little tiny bubbles popping out. I had one knot that was stubborn and kept bubbling, but I finally got it. So some of the challenges, I found the edges really challenging because it would pool and stream down the side and drip, and so then I'd take a brush or that squeegee and try to smooth it out. And if it was too runny, then it seemed like more of the epoxy ran off the top and left it a little bit thin. I got a couple divots, I think, on the side, and then when it got thicker, then it would, I could still see a little bit of the edge, and I'll show you that stuff. But it's still pretty good, and it reminds me of the Japanese philosophy, kintsugi, I think. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but the idea that there was a broken cup, and the emperor wanted to have it fixed, but he wanted to be able to see the cracks. He didn't want to hide it. He just make it pretty, and the idea that an object has a history, and to try to expect it to be perfect and cover that up doesn't really honor the history of it. So I love that philosophy as a carpenter, and again, I go around the house and look at it and like, oh yeah, I made that mistake back there, and I wasn't as good at that concept or that skill then, and I'm better at it now. So in many ways, it's kind of nice, I guess, that I don't have to, nothing always has to be perfect, and it's kind of a good way of tracking my progress or your progress as you're going through projects. And I certainly admire those people that have the skill level and that vision and can make it absolutely perfect, and that one little flaw bugs them forever, and they're great craftsmen. Maybe I'm just not at that level yet, but I've come to grips with I'm going to learn and go through the process and not be afraid to start things. I don't know everything. I'm much more of the fire ready aim person. So here it is. Like I said, the challenges were the edges, but everything else came out pretty good. It has to cure now another 2 days. I want 72 hours, so I'm kind of afraid of moving it right now. The next step is I have to take and at the bottom we get some of these drips that I have to sort of sand those off. If you get them just right, I guess when they're not when they're just firm but not really hard, you can scrape them off with a knife. But that must have happened in the middle of the night, so I couldn't stay up any longer. So I'm gonna do that, but then I think Monday will be the install. Instead of heading back up to the river this weekend, do some more paddling. So there we have it. So yeah, we went from rough sawn lumber to this over the course of I don't know, not quite a week. Again, really sort of fun process and project, and I love the wood. So if it's been helpful, hit that like button, consider subscribing, do all those things that you do. Hit me up with any questions in the comments. Again, I feel fairly competent with the woodworking stuff. The epoxy was sort of the first time I ever tried it, so I'll do my best to answer those questions, but I'm certainly not an expert. But again, thanks for checking in. I certainly appreciate it. And a quick shout out to everybody. I believe this is video number 100 on the channel. So thanks a ton for all the views and all the support. I really appreciate it. It's been great sharing this journey with you guys. Until next time, I'll see you later.